You can own the airplane, the old mechanic said quietly. But respect is the only thing that keeps it in the sky. The words drifted across the polished hangar just as the morning sun spilled through towering glass doors, painting long streaks of gold across the spotless concrete floor. Nobody paid much attention to them at first. They were too busy watching Victoria Hayes, the brilliant and famously demanding CEO of Hayes Executive Aviation, inspect her Gulfstream G650 with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting exactly what she wanted. Every polished surface reflected perfection, every employee stood a little straighter when she walked by, and every conversation faded into nervous silence. The aircraft had been grounded for 48 frustrating hours because of an electrical fault that had defeated multiple maintenance crews. Flight schedules had collapsed, investors were waiting in Chicago, and every delay had cost thousands of dollars by the hour. Then Caleb Walker arrived carrying nothing more than a worn leather toolbox, a faded work jacket, and the quiet patience of a man who had spent years solving problems no one else could explain. He never bragged. He never rushed. He simply listened to the engines, studied the wiring diagrams, and disappeared beneath access panels while everyone else argued about software updates and replacement parts. 3 hours later the aircraft came alive. The cockpit displays glowed perfectly. Every system passed inspection. The engine settled into a smooth, confident rhythm that sounded almost grateful. A few technicians exchanged surprised glances, but Caleb only wiped his hands on a clean shop towel before completing the paperwork with careful handwriting. Victoria walked toward him without smiling. She looked over the completed maintenance report for only a few seconds before lowering it onto the wing. "I'm not paying this invoice," she said flatly. The surrounding mechanics froze. Caleb looked at her, neither offended nor defensive. "Was there a problem with the repair?" he asked. "No," she answered. "The airplane works." "Then I'm confused." Victoria folded her arms. "You're an independent contractor. 3 hours of work doesn't justify this amount. Anyone with enough experience could have found that issue eventually." A nervous silence settled over the hangar. Caleb glanced once toward the aircraft before returning his calm eyes to hers. "Eventually can be expensive in aviation." Victoria shrugged without emotion. "That's my decision." One accountant shifted awkwardly while another quietly avoided eye contact. Nobody wanted to challenge the woman who signed every paycheck in the building. Caleb slowly closed his toolbox and picked up his jacket. There was no anger in his face, no raised voice, no desperate argument. He simply nodded once. "Take good care of your pilots," he said. Victoria frowned slightly, almost expecting more. "That's it?" she asked. Caleb offered the faintest smile. "That's enough." He turned and walked toward the enormous hangar doors where bright morning light swallowed his silhouette one steady step at a time. Behind him, conversations slowly resumed, although quieter than before. A few technicians watched him leave with expressions that carried more concern than sympathy. None of them realized those calm final words would travel farther than any lawsuit, louder than any public argument, and before another sunrise, they would bring an entire fleet of private aircraft to a standstill. The next morning arrived wrapped in crystal blue skies and perfect flying weather. Not a single cloud drifted above Hayes Executive Aviation, and the forecast promised smooth conditions all the way to Chicago. Ground crews rolled fuel trucks into position while baggage handlers loaded polished aluminum cargo compartments with careful precision. Inside the executive terminal, assistants hurried between conference rooms carrying tablets, coffee, and updated itineraries. Everything appeared ready. Everything except the people who mattered most. Captain Daniel Mercer stepped through the security gate carrying his flight bag with the steady confidence earned over 3 decades in the cockpit. He exchanged quiet greetings with the maintenance crew before stopping beside the aircraft. His experienced eyes traveled across the fuselage, the landing gear, and finally the completed maintenance log resting on a clipboard. He opened the document slowly. His expression changed almost immediately. He read one signature twice before closing the binder with unusual care. A young first officer approached with a relaxed smile. "Beautiful morning to fly, Captain." Daniel nodded faintly without looking away from the airplane. It would be. The younger pilot frowned. Is something wrong? Daniel handed him the maintenance record. Read the signature. The first officer studied the page before quietly whispering, Caleb Walker. His smile disappeared. Neither man spoke for several long seconds. Nearby, the engines remained silent while sunlight reflected across the cockpit windows like sheets of gold. A dispatcher walked over holding the finalized departure release. Ladies and gentlemen, we are ready for boarding. Daniel returned the paperwork without accepting it. Not yet. The dispatcher blinked in confusion. The aircraft passed inspection. I did not question the repair. Then what is the issue? Daniel looked directly into the dispatcher's eyes. Has Mr. Walker been paid? The question seemed almost absurd. That is an accounting matter. The dispatcher answered carefully. Daniel slowly shook his head. No. It became a flight matter the moment his name appeared on that report. Word spread through the hangar faster than anyone expected. Another captain preparing a different charter quietly requested the same maintenance records. Minutes later she reached the exact same page and closed the folder without another word. Across the ramp, a third pilot made one telephone call before placing his flight bag back inside his truck. Nobody raised a voice. Nobody protested. Nobody argued with management. They simply waited. Inside her corner office overlooking the private terminal, Victoria Hayes listened impatiently as her operations director explained the growing delay. How many crews are refusing? She asked sharply. At the moment 4. Replace them. We tried. He hesitated before continuing. The replacements are asking the same question. Victoria stood and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the motionless aircraft lined across the ramp. They were fueled, polished, and perfectly capable of flying. Yet not a single cabin door had closed. Not a single engine had started. Not a single pilot had climbed into a cockpit. The silence outside felt strangely heavier than the roar of jet engines ever could. Somewhere across town, Caleb Walker was helping his 11-year-old daughter Lily adjust the chain on her well-loved bicycle before school. She laughed when a little grease smudged his hand, and he smiled as though nothing unusual had happened the day before. He did not check his telephone. He did not call an attorney. He did not contact the company. He simply tightened the final bolt, spun the rear wheel until it turned perfectly straight, and reminded Lily to wear her helmet. While one father quietly began an ordinary morning, an entire aviation company had already discovered that respect could not be delayed without consequences. Victoria Hayes had built her entire career on one simple belief. Every problem had a solution, and every solution could be purchased. By mid-morning she had already contacted charter companies across 3 states, offering generous bonuses for replacement flight crews willing to operate her aircraft. One by one, the answers arrived with remarkable politeness and exactly the same outcome. Every captain asked for the aircraft registration number. Every captain requested the maintenance records. Every captain paused when they reached the final signature. Then each conversation ended with respectful regret instead of acceptance. Victoria stood beside the conference table while her executives exchanged anxious glances. Quarterly negotiations worth millions of dollars had already been postponed. Investors were waiting. International partners were asking questions. Her chief operating officer rubbed his forehead before speaking carefully. I have never seen anything like this. Victoria folded her arms. Neither have I, which means someone is organizing this. No one is making threats, he replied. No one is demanding anything. They are simply declining the assignment. Across the airport, Captain Daniel Mercer sat quietly inside the pilot's lounge with 3 other veteran aviators. Coffee cups rested untouched on the table between them. The room remained almost silent until the youngest captain finally spoke. I have only heard stories about Caleb Walker. I never actually met him. Daniel looked toward the runway shimmering beneath the afternoon sun. I met him 15 years ago. The younger pilot leaned forward. Daniel smiled faintly at the memory. A routine inspection uncovered a fuel system problem that everyone else had missed. Caleb insisted the aircraft stay on the ground another day. People complained. Schedules fell apart. Clients were furious. The following morning, the replacement component failed during laboratory testing. If that airplane had departed on time, 2 families would have lost someone they loved. Nobody interrupted. Daniel continued softly. He never told anyone afterward. He simply signed the paperwork and moved on to the next job. Another captain nodded. He did something similar for my crew in Denver. A third pilot added. Mine in Seattle. Their stories were different, but every ending sounded remarkably alike. Caleb had protected people who never realized they had been in danger. He had accepted no awards, sought no recognition, and rarely allowed his name to appear anywhere except the maintenance log itself. Back inside headquarters, Victoria requested Caleb's employment history from her legal department. The file that arrived surprised her immediately. It was astonishingly thin. A few certifications. Independent contractor records. Outstanding inspection scores. Nothing about national recognition. Nothing about extraordinary achievements. There has to be more than this, she said. Her legal advisor nodded slowly. That is exactly what I thought. He pointed toward one small note attached near the bottom of the file. Several companies requested permission to hire him full-time over the years. Why did he refuse? Victoria asked. No explanation was ever recorded. At that very moment, Caleb sat on a weathered wooden bench outside Lily's elementary school, patiently tightening the loose strap on her backpack before afternoon classes began. Did you remember your science project? He asked. Lily smiled proudly and held up a carefully painted model airplane made from cardboard and craft sticks. You said every good airplane starts with someone caring about the little details. Caleb laughed gently. I did say that. She hugged him before running toward the school entrance without realizing that hundreds of miles away experienced pilots were refusing to fly because they believed the man waving goodbye deserved the same care and respect he had quietly given everyone else for decades. By late afternoon, the stillness across Hayes Executive Aviation had become impossible to ignore. Aircraft worth tens of millions of dollars sat perfectly prepared beneath the bright summer sky, their polished fuselages reflecting sunlight across the quiet ramp, yet every cockpit remained empty. Ground crews completed their checklists with professional precision, fuel trucks departed on schedule, catering carts rolled away, and passengers waited inside elegant lounges with growing confusion. Everything mechanical was ready. Only truss refused to move. Victoria Hayes walked briskly through the operations center, her heels echoing against the marble floor as every conversation stopped the moment she passed. She entered the dispatch office where flight coordinators stared at computer screens filled with flashing delays. I want answers, she said calmly, although the tension beneath her voice was unmistakable. Call Captain Mercer again. The operations manager nodded and placed the call on speaker. After only 2 rings, Daniel Mercer answered. Captain Mercer, Victoria began. I am asking you personally to operate Flight 701 this afternoon. There was a brief silence before his measured voice returned. I appreciate the invitation, Ms. Hayes. Then report to the aircraft. I cannot do that. Victoria took a slow breath. Is there a mechanical concern? None whatsoever. Has the maintenance been performed incorrectly? No. I trust the repair completely. Her expression tightened. Then explain why my aircraft is still on the ground. Daniel answered without hesitation. Because aviation has always depended on something more valuable than machinery. The room became perfectly still. What does that mean? Victoria asked. Every signature inside a maintenance log represents responsibility, Daniel replied. If we accept that responsibility while ignoring the dignity of the person who signed it, we weaken the very culture that keeps people safe. Victoria looked toward the executives surrounding her. None of them spoke. She tried once more. This is a financial disagreement, not a flight issue. Daniel answered gently. Respectfully, it became a flight issue yesterday. Before she could continue, he added, Please understand something. Nobody asked me to refuse. Mr. Walker never contacted me. He never asked for support. This decision belongs entirely to those of us who know his character." The line disconnected quietly. No argument. No anger. Only silence. Minutes later, another captain called the dispatch office before anyone reached out to him. "Please remove my name from tomorrow's schedule until this matter has been resolved." Then another message arrived. Then another. The words differed slightly, but every sentiment remained unchanged. They trusted Caleb Walker with their lives because he had spent decades protecting theirs without expecting recognition. Victoria slowly lowered herself into the chair overlooking the airport. For the first time in years, she stopped looking at spreadsheets and started looking at people. Through the wide glass windows, she watched mechanics helping one another finish routine inspections, baggage handlers laughing together between assignments, and veteran pilots quietly talking near the hangar without a trace of hostility. Nobody was protesting. Nobody was demanding publicity. They were simply refusing to separate professional excellence from personal integrity. Across town, Caleb finished mowing the small lawn outside his modest home before carrying 2 folding chairs onto the porch. Lily stepped outside holding 2 glasses of lemonade. She handed one to her father with a cheerful smile. "Did you have a good day?" she asked. Caleb looked toward the evening sky where a distant business jet crossed the horizon, leaving a thin white line against the fading blue. He smiled gently. The best part of every day is coming home. Neither of them noticed that, only a few miles away, an entire company had finally begun asking a question no balance sheet could answer. Who was Caleb Walker, and why had so many honorable people chosen to stand beside the quiet man who had never once asked them to? The following morning, Victoria Hayes arrived at headquarters earlier than anyone else. The airport was still wrapped in the cool blue light before sunrise, and the glass walls of her office reflected an empty runway waiting for movement that never came. She placed Caleb Walker's thin personnel file on her desk again, reading every page more carefully than before. The ordinary details no longer satisfied her. Too many respected pilots had quietly risked their schedules and reputations for one independent mechanic. That kind of loyalty could not be explained by a simple repair invoice. She picked up the telephone and called Richard Bennett, the company's oldest compliance director, a man who had spent nearly 40 years in aviation safety before moving into executive administration. Richard entered her office carrying a worn leather binder instead of a laptop. His expression suggested he already knew why she had called. Victoria pointed toward Caleb's file. "Tell me what is missing." Richard studied the folder for only a moment before giving a thoughtful smile. "Almost everything that matters." Victoria looked up. "Explain." Richard placed the old binder on her desk and slowly opened it. Inside were yellowed photographs, faded conference programs, and copies of technical journals dating back more than 20 years. One photograph showed a much younger Caleb standing beside a team of engineers inside a military maintenance facility. Another showed him speaking at an aviation safety seminar attended by mechanics from across the country. A third displayed a group of smiling pilots gathered around him after completing advanced systems training. "He never talks about those days," Richard said quietly. "Most people do not even know they happened." Victoria leaned closer. "He worked for the military?" Richard nodded. "Aircraft maintenance engineering, advanced diagnostics, accident prevention, and instructor development. After leaving government service, he was invited to help design safety procedures that many maintenance facilities still follow today." Victoria turned another page and found letters of appreciation from airline training centers, aviation schools, and rescue flight organizations. None of them praised Caleb for personal achievement. Every letter thanked him for preventing mistakes before they became tragedies. Richard rested his hands on the edge of the desk. "Some mechanics replace parts. Caleb teaches people how to think before something fails." Victoria remained silent. Richard continued gently. "There is a reason experienced pilots trust his signature more than expensive marketing campaigns or impressive office buildings." She stared at one certificate bearing Caleb's name before asking another question. If he accomplished all of this, why is he working as an independent contractor? Richard smiled sadly. Because 12 years ago his wife became seriously ill. He turned down promotions that required constant travel. After she passed away, his daughter became his entire world. Flexible work allowed him to pick her up after school, attend every science fair, every music recital, every parent conference. He traded prestige for time. Victoria slowly closed the binder. The room felt unusually quiet. Through the windows she watched the first rays of sunlight touch the waiting aircraft outside. For the first time since this dispute began, she stopped seeing Caleb as the mechanic who repaired her airplane. She began seeing the father who had quietly chosen a smaller life so someone else could have a better childhood. And somewhere deep inside, a question she had never expected began to grow. Had she mistaken humility for weakness simply because real greatness had never introduced itself? That afternoon, Victoria Hayes cancelled every meeting on her calendar for the first time in years. Instead of walking into another boardroom, she drove across town without a driver, without an assistant, and without the polished confidence that usually surrounded her. Richard Bennett had quietly given her one address and one sentence before she left. If you want to understand Caleb Walker, do not visit the airport. Visit the life he chose instead. The neighborhood was modest, lined with maple trees whose summer leaves cast gentle shadows across quiet sidewalks. Children rode bicycles through the streets while neighbors waved from freshly cut front lawns. Nothing about the place resembled the world of executive terminals or luxury aircraft. Victoria parked along the curb and remained inside her car for several moments, uncertain why she suddenly felt like an outsider. Across the street she noticed Caleb kneeling beside a small wooden workbench in his garage, helping Lily assemble a model airplane for a school science exhibition. Pieces of painted foam, tiny decals, and bottles of glue covered the table. Caleb listened carefully as his daughter explained the design with animated enthusiasm. Every few moments he nodded, asked another thoughtful question, and encouraged her to solve the next problem herself instead of doing it for her. Victoria expected to see a man burdened by resentment after everything that had happened. Instead, she found laughter drifting through the warm afternoon air. Lily accidentally attached one wing upside down before looking at her father with embarrassed eyes. Caleb chuckled softly. Good engineers are not the ones who never make mistakes, he said. They are the ones who notice them before takeoff. Lily laughed, carefully removed the wing, and tried again. Victoria found herself smiling despite everything. She had spent years believing success came from demanding perfection. Caleb seemed to believe it came from patiently teaching confidence. Just then an elderly neighbor approached carrying a small lawn mower wheel in his hands. Caleb, the man called. I think this old thing finally gave up on me. Caleb stood immediately, and accepted the broken wheel with an easy smile. Give me 20 minutes. How much do I owe you? The neighbor asked. Caleb shook his head. Just bring Lily one of your famous blueberry muffins next time you bake. The older man laughed warmly before walking home. Victoria watched the exchange in complete silence. No contracts. No invoices. No negotiations. Just quiet kindness woven naturally into everyday life. As she prepared to leave unnoticed, Lily looked toward the street and waved cheerfully without recognizing who sat behind the windshield. Victoria hesitated before slowly waving back. Caleb glanced up as well. Their eyes met across the quiet neighborhood for only a brief moment. He recognized her immediately but showed neither surprise nor resentment. Instead, he simply offered the same calm nod he had given inside the hangar before returning his attention to his daughter. There was no performance in his humility. No hidden audience to impress. This was simply who he was when nobody important seemed to be watching. Victoria quietly started the engine and drove away more slowly than she had arrived. The silence inside her car felt different now. It no longer carried frustration. It carried reflection. For the first time in a very long time, the woman who could purchase almost anything in the world began to understand that the one thing she had failed to value was the quiet character of a father who measured success not by wealth, but by the kind of person his daughter would become. The following morning, Victoria Hayes returned to the quiet neighborhood with something she had never imagined carrying herself. Inside a simple leather envelope rested a certified check covering Caleb Walker's invoice in full, along with additional compensation approved by her accounting department. Yet, as she stood outside his modest home, the envelope suddenly felt much heavier than paper should. Caleb was finishing repairs on the porch railing while Lily watered bright summer flowers beside the front steps. When he noticed Victoria walking toward the house, he carefully set his tools aside and greeted her with the same calm expression he had worn inside the hangar. "Good morning," he said gently. Victoria nodded. "May we talk?" Caleb glanced toward Lily. "Would you mind checking on the tomatoes in the backyard?" She smiled, picked up the watering can, and happily skipped away. The neighborhood settled into peaceful silence once again, broken only by birds singing from the maple trees overhead. Victoria extended the envelope with both hands. "I came to make this right." Caleb accepted it politely without opening it. "Thank you." She waited for relief to appear on his face, but none came. Instead, he simply looked at the envelope for a moment before offering it back to her. Victoria blinked in surprise. "You are not taking it?" Caleb shook his head slowly. "Not today." She looked genuinely confused. "It is everything we owed you, plus interest." Caleb smiled kindly. "The amount is correct." "Then why?" He rested one hand lightly against the porch railing he had just repaired. "Because the money was never the part that was broken." The words settled softly between them, carrying far more weight than either of them expected. Victoria lowered her eyes. Caleb continued without accusation or bitterness. "When someone spends a lifetime protecting people they will probably never meet, they hope for one simple thing. Not applause. Not awards. Just the belief that their work has value." Victoria listened without interrupting. "When you refused to pay," Caleb said quietly, "you were not only questioning my invoice. You were telling every young mechanic watching that experience, honesty, and responsibility could be dismissed the moment someone powerful decided they were inconvenient." A warm breeze moved gently through the front yard. Either of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, Victoria looked back at him. "I thought I was negotiating a price." Caleb nodded. "I know. Instead," she whispered, "I was measuring the wrong thing." Caleb's expression softened even more. "We all make mistakes." Victoria looked toward the backyard where Lily laughed while chasing a butterfly drifting above the garden. "Your daughter must be proud of you." Caleb smiled with quiet gratitude. "She reminds me every day what kind of man I want to become." Victoria took a slow breath before accepting the envelope back into her own hands. "Then allow me to repair this properly." Caleb looked at her for a long moment before giving a small respectful nod. "Repairs done with sincerity usually last." As Victoria walked back toward her car, she realized the conversation had contained no anger, no demands, and no attempt to embarrass her. The quiet father she had underestimated had just given her the most valuable lesson of her career. Respect could never be purchased after it was lost. It could only be rebuilt one honest choice at a time. 2 days later, every employee of Hayes Executive Aviation received an unexpected message requesting their presence inside the main executive hangar at exactly 9 o'clock on Friday morning. Mechanics stood beside polished toolboxes, still wearing work shirts stained with honest labor. Flight attendants gathered quietly near the boarding stairs. Dispatchers, accountants, receptionists, engineers, and pilots formed neat rows beneath the high steel ceiling while sunlight streamed through the enormous hangar doors. The Gulf Stream that had started everything rested silently behind them, gleaming beneath the bright lights like a witness waiting to hear the truth. Caleb Walker almost declined the invitation. He preferred quiet workshops to public gatherings, and attention had never interested him. Yet after Lily gently smiled and told him, "Sometimes people need to see what respect looks like," he agreed to attend. He arrived carrying the same worn leather toolbox that had been beside him throughout countless ordinary workdays. There was no expensive suit. No polished speech prepared in advance. Only quiet dignity. Victoria Hayes stepped onto a small platform placed in front of the aircraft. For the first time since becoming Chief Executive Officer, she left her prepared notes untouched. She looked across the faces of hundreds of employees before allowing the silence to settle naturally. "I have spent years asking all of you to take responsibility for your decisions," she began softly. "Today I will do the same." The room became perfectly still. "Several days ago I refused to pay Caleb Walker for work that was completed with excellence. I convinced myself I was protecting company finances. In reality, I failed to recognize the value of character, experience, and integrity. That mistake belongs to me alone." No one moved. Even the distant sounds of airport traffic seemed to fade away. Victoria stepped down from the platform and walked directly toward Caleb. She held the same leather envelope in both hands. "Mr. Walker," she said, her voice steady but humble, "I am asking your forgiveness, not because I am the Chief Executive Officer, but because I was wrong." She handed him the envelope. Inside rested the original payment, the additional compensation, and a handwritten letter signed personally by her. Caleb read only the first few lines before quietly closing it again. He looked at Victoria with the same calm kindness she had seen outside his home. "Thank you," he said simply. "Repairs done with sincerity usually last." A gentle smile crossed Victoria's face. She turned toward the assembled employees once more. "Beginning today, no person at this company will ever be measured only by a title or a paycheck. Every mechanic, every cleaner, every dispatcher, every pilot, and every member of this team deserves the same respect that keeps every aircraft safe." Before anyone could react, Captain Daniel Mercer stepped forward carrying his flight bag. One by one, every other pilot followed him. They stood together facing Caleb before Daniel offered a respectful nod. "Captain Mercer requesting permission to fly, Mr. Walker." Caleb smiled modestly. "The airplane was ready days ago," Daniel answered with quiet conviction. "Now the company is ready too." A ripple of warm applause slowly filled the hangar, growing naturally instead of explosively. Some employees wiped away quiet tears while others simply smiled with relief. No celebration felt louder than the silence that had come before it. Minutes later the flight crews climbed aboard their aircraft, cabin doors closed, engines awakened one after another with smooth confidence, and the first business jet lifted gracefully into the clear blue sky. As the sound slowly faded into the distance, those who remained inside the hangar understood something no training manual could ever teach. Airplanes may rise because of powerful engines, but organizations rise because ordinary people choose to honor extraordinary character. 1 year passed with the quiet certainty that only honest change can create. Hayes Executive Aviation was no longer known only for elegant aircraft or successful executives. Across the aviation community it had earned a different reputation, one built on respect before authority and character before status. New mechanics entering the company during orientation were shown photographs of engines, safety systems, and maintenance procedures, but they were also told a simple story about the day an entire fleet remained on the ground because integrity mattered more than schedules. Victoria Hayes never allowed that lesson to fade. She established a new mentorship program where experienced mechanics trained young technicians alongside veteran pilots, reminding every employee that aviation had always depended upon people trusting one another long before they trusted machines. The first invitation to lead the program was offered to Caleb Walker. He accepted only after asking one question. "Will it allow me to keep having dinner with my daughter every evening?" Victoria smiled. That was the first condition written into the position. Caleb became Senior Director of Flight Safety and Technical Mentorship, but very little about him actually changed. He still carried the same worn leather toolbox through the hangar. He still greeted receptionists by name. He still stopped to answer questions from apprentices with the same patience he showed Lily while building model airplanes at home. Titles had never defined him, and they never would. One bright autumn afternoon Lily walked through the hangar carrying her completed science project, now displayed inside a clear case with a blue ribbon attached to the front. Victoria happened to be finishing a meeting when she noticed the young girl waiting near the maintenance office. "Did you win?" she asked with genuine curiosity. Lily beamed proudly. Second place. Victoria laughed softly. Only second? Lily nodded without disappointment. Dad said doing careful work is more important than coming first. Victoria glanced across the hangar where Caleb was helping a new mechanic understand a complicated wiring diagram. He spoke quietly, listened carefully, and encouraged confidence instead of fear. Watching him, she realized that the greatest leaders rarely stood at the center of attention. They stood beside others until those people discovered the best version of themselves. As the afternoon sun filtered through the massive hangar doors, Captain Daniel Mercer prepared another routine departure. Before boarding, he paused beside Caleb and extended his hand. Good afternoon, Director. Caleb smiled and shook his head. It is still just Caleb. Daniel returned the smile. Fair enough. Thank you for reminding all of us why we chose this profession. Moments later, the aircraft accelerated smoothly down the runway before rising gracefully into the clear American sky. Everyone inside the hangar watched until it became only a bright silver point above the clouds. Victoria stood beside Caleb in comfortable silence. You were right, she said quietly. Respect really is what keeps it in the sky. Caleb looked upward with calm eyes before answering. Respect keeps much more than airplanes in the air. Either of them spoke again. They simply watched another safe departure together while the late afternoon sunlight filled the hangar with warmth instead of noise. Sometimes the greatest victories arrive without applause. Sometimes the strongest people never raise their voices. And sometimes a struggling single father changes an entire company not by demanding justice, but by living every single day with quiet dignity, steady grace, and a character so unwavering that the world eventually learns to rise to meet it.